Good day to you. I'm sorry I can't be with you, but you all are experts on this subject that I'm going to be talking about today already. And that's the subject of radio programming. You know a lot about radio programming just by virtue of being a listener, because the way that radio is designed in the United States is very much catered towards niche listening. You may not have thought of that before, niche listening, but it's really a way of designing content that is for a very specific audience. For example, you won't put on a radio station and have three songs, the first one being Metallica, the second one being Elvis, and the third one being Satchmo, Louis Armstrong. You're not going to have that, right? Because radio stations are formatted today. And each radio station stays within its format of rock and roll or country or CHR, as we call it, contemporary hit radio. So that's what we're talking about today in this instructor video. We're talking about programming, and it's all based on the format coming out of the 1960s as a way to rescue radio from the declining audiences because they were going over to television. So the format was a way to say we're not going to get the biggest audience. We're not even going to get a general audience. We're going to go for females 18 to 35. We're going to go for men and women 45 to 54 who have a high disposable income with this all-news radio station. That's what radio stations do. They're formatted. And it's sad to say, but most radio stations today that are music-oriented radio stations, they don't have much freedom for the disc jockey, the on-air personality, to make selections of music content, which is to say that radio programming when it comes to music today is very formula-driven. It's computerized. It's scientific, if you want to look at it that way. Playlists for radio stations are generated according to algorithms just like Google. And a computer algorithm is not going to put, for example, two female vocalists who sound the same or very similar next to each other in a song. That's what algorithms are going to be doing. Radio programming today is largely scientific, largely computerized, largely predictable. And so if you're in college radio right now is really the time to explore your interests. Now you really have that creativity. You don't have anybody telling you what you have to play. Radio formats are not just in competition with each other. Country is not just in competition with light rock. Like you can have somebody that goes back and forth between both. But formats are also in competition with other forms of radio servicing, which is to say online servicing and Spotify, Pandora, and it's to say satellite radio as well. It's also to say in competition with people's playing back their own music from their own playlists that they have stored in their phones. So formats have a lot of competition out there today, and the main thing that makes radio formats desirable above all those other forms of delivering radio is locality, is the localness of the content. And that's why when you listen to WSBG radio, you can hear something like the school lunch menu for 5th grade. Yeah, nobody else, Pandora's not going to be carrying that, but that's really important information for a father or mother who's getting their kid off to school and their kid is a picky eater. Like they need to know whether they need to pack something or not, and radio can deliver that kind of information. Also, you have the advertising is local as well. It's the way for the local hardware store to get to people. You're not going to go through the CNN advertising spots to get to a local group of people to purchase your products. If you're a hardware store like you are in Crystal Street in East Stroudsburg, no, you're going to choose a radio station to advertise. So let's talk about the main formats that are out there. There is no such thing as an exact format, even though they are pretty exact, which is to say that a lot of stations take a format and then they will slightly tweak it. I'll give an example of that when we get into it. But nonetheless, there are some basic formats, even if they get tweaked. So the first one is the AC format, referred to as adult contemporary. And the way that gets tweaked sometimes, they call it hot AC. That's when they're tweaking the format. It's generally geared towards females, 45 to 54. It's very popular with advertisers. It's like soft, light rock. It's going to be like, from previously, it's going to be like a Bryan Adams song or a Nickelback song when you're talking about rock and roll. It's going to be on a Bruno Mars song if you're talking about pop, possibly, depending on the Bruno Mars song. It could be a Taylor Swift song. It's like that. It's popular music, but it's not pop music. It's got an edge to it, but it's not really edgy to it. It's like safe music. That's adult. That's why they call it adult contemporary. Next up as a format is adult hits. Adult hits, which can go by various names. You've got classic hits or pop hits or alternative radio hits. These are for females also 35 to 54. Notice that the age range is more in the middle range there. These are hits that were hits years ago, and now we're listening to them again. We're saying, I remember when that Britney Spears song was all over the radio. Oops, I did it again. Adult hits, right? At the time, it was pop music. And now as an adult, if you're 35 years old, you're saying, I want to listen to that. Yeah, it's like a nostalgic kind of radio, adult hits. Next up, you have CHR, which you already know really well, but you don't call it CHR. It's Top 40 Radio. The CHR is for Contemporary Hits Radio, not Christian radio. CHR Radio, Top 40 Radio. It's for a very young audience, sometimes as young as 12 to 18. It's pop hits. It's pop culture. It's contests. It's fast-talking DJs. It's oriented about music, and the music is helping young people to grow up and gain their independence. Yet they don't have a lot of money, so the advertising is tricky. It's not the best audience to go for disposable income-wise, although people are starting to earn money 16, 17, 18 and getting their first jobs, and they'll spend money on soda and gum and other stuff like that, the small expenses. So CHR Radio, that's what it's going for. It used to be the most popular radio format in the United States, but about 20 years ago it got passed by this next format, and that's the country music format. Country is an interesting format to talk about because it used to be based in the South, and it used to be very twangy in terms of its sound. You had all these performers like Hank Williams, Dolly Parton, classic country music artists with twangy guitars and singing in a slower way and singing about content that's more related to the South. Like a moonshine, for example. We won't talk about the moonshine in the North. We have other names for it. Grain alcohol is what we just go. Moonshine is a word that you might hear in a country music song, not to stereotype them as being about drinking, but just to choose a Southern local word. But that all changed. It all changed with MTV, really. MTV was taken advantage of by country music, and they started to recognize the importance of the visualness in performances. And Garth Brooks and later Taylor Swift, they started, Shania Twain, they started presenting like good-looking people, if you consider them to be good-looking people. Darius, I forget his last name, from Hootie Blow and the Blowfish, he's a country music artist. Same thing. So Darius Ruckus, I think his name is. So country music exploded out of the South onto the national scene. And at the same time, it started to embrace more rock sounds, too. That's what Garth Brooks did. He brought in rock. And a lot of the artists that you hear today, they're doing country. Jason Aldean, they have rock-sounding songs in their music. It's not as twangy as before. And that helped expand the reach of country, which does have a heavier female audience than male audience. 52% of the audience for country music stations is female. Next up, we have soft adult and easy listening music. Soft adult, easy listening music, also talked about as lounge music, also talked about as elevator music. A lot of times it's just instrumental. Sometimes it can be hit songs that are played as instrumental versions. It's like in the background. It's really in the background. Like it's there, but you're not noticing it. You're still talking. You're still watching, maybe even TV while easy listening is on. It's supposed to just sort of set a tone. That's for 50 plus, for older people. I want the harsh sounds of rock or even country, and definitely not hip hop on their ears, so go to easy listening. Next up, we have classic / modern / alternative rock, geared mostly towards males, people like in my age frames for classic rock. It's going to be a lot of 1970s hard rock, Led Zeppelin, The Who, The Rolling Stones. But these stations also sometimes tend to specialize in what is known as the B-side song that came out. The B-side song is not the hit. It's the other song that on the other side of the album. It's referring to vinyl. Vinyl used to come out with an A-side and a B-side. The B-side was the lesser-known side, the weaker side, etc. But a lot of classic rock stations say the real great songs, like if you're a Deep Purple fan, I don't know if you know this band, like a really popular hit song was My Woman from Tokyo when it came out. Everybody's listening to that. It had great organ in it as well. But the song that might be played by the classic rock station would be the song Lazy. If you know that song, Lazy by Deep Purple. It's the B-side. Then we have news, talk, information, sports kinds of formats. They have different variations. You can have a news talk and a sports radio station. WFAN is a sports station, but it also does news. WCBS does strictly news, both of them in New York City. KYW is the biggest radio station in terms of audience in Philadelphia. It's an all-news radio station. Those news stations are in big cities. It's where you're going to find the all-news radio station, where you have a high density of people. You have a lot of financial stuff going on, sports going on, entertainment going on, crime going on, laws going on, stuff going on, because you have so many people. So news is much easier to generate news or talk shows. Sean Hannity, big talk show that is going on. Joy, what's her name? I was just watching her this weekend. MSNBC co-radio host. She had a talk show for a long time. Let's see if I can circle back to her name. We have that format. And then we have public radio format. We have public radio format, and that is going to include college radio stations as well. It's basically non-commercial radio. These radio stations are going to, if they're in the college territory, they're going to be either diversified like WESS here, which is we embrace all formats, all genres, or they're going to be specialized in one of two areas, either jazz or alternative rock. That's where I see college radio stations when they go for formats. I personally don't agree that college radio stations should have a format like that anyhow. I think it should be diverse. But then you also have NPR, National Public Radio, NPR. And that radio program is, those people are, the audience demographic is elite and educated. So they are people with money. They're going to be, for the most part, white-collar people, and they're investors. They have secure jobs. They're commuters. They're driving into the city. They're going to seek programming on public radio, and it's going to be the shows like Morning Edition. If you know about that one, that's or All Things Considered. The morning one, you can tell that All Things Considered comes on in the afternoon. Okay, so now it's bothering me. I can't remember the name of that host. I was just watching the other day, so I'm going to do a quick Google, see if I can find out her name. She's an MSNBC host. Joy Reid, R-E-I-D, Joy Reid. She was also a talk show host. Many talk show hosts that are in radio make the move and they go over to television. All right, so let's continue on with a new subject now, talking about programming. Let's talk about the program director. This is the main position. This is the last thing that we'll be talking about today. We have a program director at WESS. His name is Andy Perez. Program directors have to be radiophiles. They have to be radiophiles, program directors. That's somebody who's just living, breathing, eating radio. You're just absolutely in the radio all day long, not just when you go to the job. Of course, a lot of jobs are like that, right? So here's some of the things that you have to do as a PD, which also, by the way, is sometimes called operations director. At some radio stations, this position is called operations director because they're also in charge of facilities, the management of everything from paying the electricity bills to making sure the grass gets mowed. There some operations managers, some program directors are also operation managers. Oftentimes, the PD is that primetime on-air host as well. They've got that slot, which is when most people are listening to radio. Do you know when that is? That's from 6 to 10 in the morning. That's radio's prime time slot. It's called drive time. Actually, it's called morning drive because radio has two drive times, two prime times, different from television. Radio has prime time in the morning, 6 to 10, and a prime time in the afternoon, 3 to 7. You know, right? Why, right? That's when people are commuting. That's when they're in their car. That's where people are listening to radio. So you put your best as PD, and you put your best, most popular, in that slot, 6 to 10. Other jobs that PD have include hiring disc jockeys, scouting out the talent, listening to demo tapes, interviewing people, hiring them, getting them into the right slot, and then coaching those DJs. Another job. You're constantly you got to tighten that up. When you do the weather, I need a little bit more pizzazz. Need some more humor in the morning part of the show. Let your partner talk a little bit more. Try and reduce ums, ers, and all. You do that even with professionals. You're constantly coaching your staff. Another job of you is to handle music. Like you're the person who's implementing the format if you're the program director. So you don't have the individual decisions over the songs. You might have a few here and there. That is up to you. But for the most part, you're plugging in the elements that allow the algorithm that's being used to generate your station's content to function properly. Also, you're handling some non-music stuff as well, public service announcements, promos, any production that comes out, including advertisements, a commentary by the general manager, whatever that's non-music, you're handling that as well. Sometimes you're even the program director for a cluster of radio stations, not just one, but 2 or 3 that are owned by the same company, like iHeartMedia. A lot of times, the way that you are generating the overall concept of what your format should look like is through a device known as a program clock. A program clock, I would like you to Google that during this instructor video. They'll come right up, radio program clock. You'll see it's like a giant pie with triangles or pieces, and in each triangle you're going to have a category of song that's going to be played. So the first piece of the pie after 12 o'clock might be an A1 song, which means it's current, it's popular, and it's by a well-known artist. Then the next song might be an A2 song with current, popular, by unnamed artists. When we get into like the piece of the pie that might be like what we would, on a clock, we would call 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, that piece of the pie may be a hit that's 3 years old. So you're playing a song that still fits in with the format, but it's older, but it's a remember this kind of thing. So program clocks generally set up the overall how hour by hour should go for a radio station. It includes not just those content types that I talked about, but also public service announcements and advertising. And advertising is shown on those hot clocks, as they're also called, program clocks, as stop sets. That's what that term refers to in radio, stop set. It's stopping the set, which is the music or the talk or the sports, to play a bunch of advertisements. A stop set is a group of advertisements. Also, the program director has a lot of say over the station's website, which includes podcasts and streaming and blogs that are going on. The program director is constantly trying to drive traffic from the listening audience to the website and vice versa. That's what you're trying to do, get those two to work together. And so as a result of these duties, the program director really has to know the radio audience. And it's not like you study your audience and they stay the same, right? Do you listen to the same music today that you did 2 years ago? No, people grow. And you will actually find a lot of small town radio stations, they change their format as people age. Like they may have a top 40 radio station for a while, and then the small town people, they become accustomed to it, but then they grow up, and then the station changes to a rock station, some kind of rock station, not like adult contemporary. That's too old as the audience is growing up. So, and it's not just the age of audience that changes, tastes change, with tolerance for songs change. You know, you got to know your audience, and you also have to know the music. You got to know what music's coming out all the time. That's why you're a radiophile. You're constantly listening, not just to who's a new artist, but what are the new sounds? Like there's sounds of eras. And you can tell a song that's from the 2020s, right? It's got that sound to it. I can tell a song from the 70s. I can tell a song from the 80s. I can tell a song from the 90s without even knowing the song in many cases, because the era is the context for the music. So you got to know the music of your era and your context. And that includes managing your music library. And that includes working with music licensing companies to get the music that you want to air. And finally, the PD has to know FCC regulations, the Federal Communications Commission, which, by the way, is going to break some ground. The very first female has been nominated to be the president, or I think it's called president, it might be the commissioner, chief commissioner maybe, the head person at the FCC. First time we have a female nominated. The FCC is the Federal Communications Commission. And that, now I got to go find that female's name, right? Let me move this phone here. I just learned about it yesterday. I'm surprised I don't remember. Let's see, female. All right, so the first female to be nominated, her name is a difficult name to pronounce. The second name, Jessica Rosenworcel, I believe is how you pronounce her name, Rosenworcel. She's the first female to be nominated to the FCC. The FCC has far-reaching powers and control over radio. They're the main regulatory body, right? So the program director has to know what the regulations are. When you have a radio show at WESS, you're not filling out that logbook just because it's an internal procedure that we use. That's an FCC regulation. The FCC demands to know at all times who is operating a radio show. We have other regulations as well, like you have to play the top of the hour ID. WESS 90.3 FM, East Stroudsburg University, East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. It's 3 items. It's your call letters, it's your frequency, and it's your location. That's by law. That's so that pilots who are up in the air and they lose their instrumentation because of some kind of failure and they have no line of sight to the ground because of the weather, they have a backup. They can tune into a radio station. They can figure out where they can land that plane. Hardly ever used, if it ever, but it's one of those regulations. And the FCC has many, many more, including employment reports, including the color of your radio tower, the transmitter output, so many things. And so you really, as a PD, need to know, because if the FCC comes knocking at your door, as they have twice at our radio station, WESS, you don't want them to find anything. One time they did find something at WESS. They found out that we weren't reporting our emergency alert procedures correctly, the EAS data correctly, so we had to fix that. We got a warning. But other stations are not so fortunate. They get a fine. And you don't want that. It's bad publicity, and then your advertisers pull out, and you got a big problem on your hands. So the program director, amongst all the other duties that I've just mentioned, has to know FCC files. And that sums up that position, the program director. Have a great day.